Genesis 37. Genesis 37. Hi, Dawn.
The Lord tried to teach me to be quiet.
I called you out.
Second, yes, you did. I was
I
going to go
called
like
you
this.
out.
And oh, never mind. I'm going to make it short. Thank you, Lord.
Last week we just looked at the first few verses as we find the story shifting in the life of Jacob. And from Genesis chapter 12, which we didn't start there, but from Genesis chapter 12 all the way through the end of the book of Genesis, we really are getting introduced to the patriarchs, to the fathers of the faith. Genesis 12, we start with God's promise to Abraham, and you read about the life of Abraham, and then you read about the life of Isaac, and of course where we started out was with the life of Jacob. And it turns a corner in chapter 37. It's fascinating because it says Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. And then immediately after that, it starts telling the story of Joseph. And Joseph's one of my favorite biblical characters and has been for many, many years. It's just to watch and learn from his reactions to the things that happened in his life and in his journey. Very instructive for us as we make our journey. And we were introduced to it, and it wasn't the most flattering introduction last week. The two things we learned about Jacob in the first 4 verses, and that's about as far as we got last week. He was a young man of 17, and in verse 2 it points out he brought their father a bad report about his brothers and their tending of the flocks. Now, we aren't told what that report was. We aren't told why he did that, but we are told that. And then the next thing we learn about him is that his father, Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And we're told why. It says because he had been born to him in his old age. Of course, he wasn't the last son born in his old age. That was Benjamin. But both Joseph and Benjamin were born to the woman that he loved deeply, and that's Rachel. And Rachel, of course, died in childbirth with Benjamin. But Israel loved Joseph, made him a richly ornamented robe, a robe of many colors is how some of the translations would have it. It's a robe that singled him out as special. And in verse 4, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. Could not speak a kind word to him. So right off the bat, as we're introduced to Joseph, it's not the best situation. Matter of fact, it's a pretty rocky situation. And it seems to be the norm for Jacob's life as we go along, or as we travel with him. That's kind of where we left off last week. And so let's pick up, because Joseph has 2 dreams. Let's take a quick look at those dreams and go from verses 5 through 11. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. I don't know what to think here, okay? "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So here we go, right? He has two dreams. He certainly doesn't keep it to himself. He tells those that are affected the most by those dreams. He tells his brothers, tells his father. And the dreams are very, very clear that God has his hand on Jacob and is going to use Joseph in a mighty way. Now, nobody can begin to grasp what that's going to be and how that's going to play out. I did find it really interesting in verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him, which we get all the way through here, but his father kept the matter in mind. His father rebuked him when he told him the second dream, but his father had learned through all of his experiences there might be something to this. I mean, how many times did he hear his mother talk about the conversation and asking the Lord, why is all this jostling going on in my womb with the twins, these two? And of course, the visions and the times that Jacob heard from God, he's tucking that one away. He's going to keep an eye out and see what's going to happen with all of this. Any thought, any question about what you see happening here? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward in terms of the relationship that Joseph had with his brothers. Anything you can take away? Mm-hmm.
Do you suppose there was ever any talking between Joseph and the Lord at that point?
At this point, any talking between Joseph and the Lord?
Wouldn't you be smarter than that? I mean, you've been raised with all these brothers. I mean, if I just look at my two and they were like, ugh. And you had this many brothers and you're not smart enough to keep your mouth shut. But, so do you suppose he did any talking to the Lord? Because, Rachel said,
if he did
Rachel talk to God when she had that dream, or just told other people?
Well, she actually was praying.
Okay, so
asking.
she was
seeking God.
Okay,
these are two dreams just given to
Joseph. Doesn't
Joseph.
it make you wonder, though? Did he? I mean, obviously the Lord had something in mind and used it. Obviously,
the Lord
he did.
we know it's from God.
Yeah, but
okay, but I don't see. We aren't told anything about. Well, Joseph sought the Lord out. These are two dreams given to Joseph.
Well, I don't do it when I should. I mean, I'm not blaming him. I'm not saying Joseph.
What do you all think?
I think the lack of self-awareness in all these stories is shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, how dense these people are about just, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure this out.
They didn't have any psychiatrists back in those days.
He's thumbing his nose at his brothers.
Yeah.
This is really dumb.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And this is not, then you've got the same thing going on, a generation before with Rachel and Leah.
Mm-hmm.
What are they thinking?
Right.
They're not.
Good. Yeah, Brandon said they're not. They're not thinking.
Well, the father had so favored Joseph.
Yes, he had.
And here were all these others
Yes,
who
he
were
had.
older and had served the family,
Yeah.
and they felt affronted by it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, and it says from the very beginning, they saw how Israel, Jacob, treated Joseph, and they
He
knew
felt
their
superior.
place.
He knew he was superior because his father taught him to be.
Yeah, and he made him the robe that set him aside, that that made him special. So you get where the brothers are coming from. It's all very human. It's all very natural reaction. Does it excuse it? I'm thinking about what you and Larry are saying. I totally agree, but at the same time, in 40 years of ministry, I can tell you there's been countless times. My jaw just drops when I see what people do. And I think, how clueless.
Been one of them.
How clueless. I mean, we're supposed to know that. You know? But we do some really.
And you have to minister, actually we have to minister, even to the unlovely who do stupid things.
Well, yeah. There's
Even if
nobody
it's
we don't
us
minister to.
And even if it's us sometimes.
There's nobody we don't minister to, right? But, you know, it's just one of the things that strikes me, and it's not necessarily in here, it's just what strikes me. There's zero humility in Joseph right now. Just absolutely zero humility. And when you think about our lives, and you think about the example of Christ, and you think about the call of Christ on our lives, the call for us to be humble. And certainly, Joseph's going to learn that lesson, and he's going to learn it really hard. But right now, as a young guy, you know, he's got the bull by the horns, and I mean, his dad's behind him. He's treated special. Now he has the 2 dreams, but he didn't have the common sense to keep it to himself and see how this is going to play out, you know. But, you know, any other thoughts or questions about this? It's kind of straightforward and head on with what's happening.
Mankind hasn't changed.
No, mankind hasn't.
We're still doing the same thing.
We're brash and brazen.
We haven't learned a thing.
But I do note the Father is keeping this all tucked away. Ed, were you going to say something?
I was going to say a couple of little things.
Okay.
First of all, he was 17.
Mm-hmm.
I figure that his older brother was probably 37, 40, and from then,
Yeah.
more or less, something
Yeah.
like that. My question is, did Jacob, after all his encounters with God, because the Bible doesn't tell us that, did he ever make an effort to tell these guys, because the youngest was 17 then,
Right.
to say, hey, we are following God, or I'm sure he did, or maybe he didn't, but the Bible doesn't tell us.
Did everybody hear Ed's question?
Good one.
The question had to do, did Jacob ever reach out to his sons and share, try to teach them about what God has been showing him? Because that's what I'm hearing you ask. And try to explain to them. I get the sense through here, you know, each time God reveals himself, each time he gives that promise of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, of the land that's going to be handed over, you know, calls him to move and go to Bethel. I get a sense that he doesn't keep that just to himself. I mean, that's something. Now, how he gets that across, we aren't really told. But I do get a sense that I would tend to think, yes, the brothers aren't in total darkness about what God was doing. I think in the sense of the promise that was to their father. And even hearing Jacob talk about how he went to Padan Aram running for his life. I mean, his life story, that he had nothing, and how God blessed him while he was there with 12 sons and made him wealthy, and brought him back home, and just the whole journey from an overview of how God protected him and watched over him. I can't help but think that that's been transmitted to the sons in various ways.
Does the story of Dinah argue against that? Does the story of Dinah, where these guys are just totally out of control and, you know, act like idiots, does that argue against?
It could.
That
it could.
That Jacob is teaching them and disciplining them. And the other thing that says to me is, you know, if Jacob was a good father, if he was insightful, if he loved Joseph, he would have said, your brothers, they crazy. You know, watch out for them. They're vengeful.
Yeah.
They are. They're mean as snakes, and they'll go off.
Yeah.
And you better watch it, kid.
Yeah.
Why isn't that there? I don't really see much fatherly,
Well, now,
influence.
don't misunderstand. I'm not calling Israel or Jacob a wonderful father by any means. But are they aware of the story? I believe they are. I think there's been times that's been gotten across in various ways to them. You know, if I look back, and this is within a church, okay? I got any church I've served in, looking back over the last 40 years, I see a lot of craziness, you know, in terms of actions of Christian people and what parents teach their children or don't teach their children. And so, I mean, I look at this and you know, I don't know.
It goes along with your experience, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think we're all flawed, and unless we're really tuned into life, I mean, how many times parents have been tuned into career? How many times parents have been tuned into things that aren't necessarily going to lift their children in a close relationship with the Lord? How many times do they do that and the kids still veer off and go their own direction? You know, I mean, it's just something. You see a lot of that. And you scratch your head and you're thinking, how does that even happen? Because people have grown up in the church and they know what's going on. Tom?
Well, Pastor, I'm reading back through the Old Testament again, and those two dreams come true later on.
Oh, yeah.
So you can't rebuke and say that they were dreaming other than that God put it in their head
Oh, yeah.
when they did.
Most certainly.
And
Yeah, I think what people are struggling with is not, I mean, I think they believe those dreams are from God and they're for Joseph, and that was like an insight God was giving Joseph. But what we're not stumbling over, but what we're kind of marveling at is how Joseph handled it. I mean, the first thing he did is go out and tell his brothers.
Like, nah,
Yeah, right. I'm gonna
God forgot to tell him not to tell his brother.
keep this to yourself.
Oh, yeah, his robe
Just for a little bit. Wanda?
The end of the story, way on several chapters after this, when it happens that Joseph actually was over his brothers, do you think he told them about these dreams? God told him to tell them about these dreams, so they would look back and say, yeah, God told us that many, many years ago.
Oh, that's a big question, and I don't have an answer to that. Did God ask Joseph to tell them, this is me? I don't think so. I think Joseph, that was just his nature at that age. But I can't prove that. You know, certainly they will remember it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and these are things that you look at. It's going to happen.
Well, if he hadn't told them, they wouldn't remember it.
Well, and the case could be made, if he hadn't told them, they wouldn't get even more upset and want to sell him. I mean, that case can be made. I just tend to think that God has a way of taking horrible situations and making all his purposes come together. But that's just me.
You mean as in all things, as in Romans
8:28. Yes.
What disturbs me is that Jacob, Israel, was not wiser after all of his interaction with God.
I totally agree. It disturbs us that Jacob, Israel isn't wiser after all these times. And yet, Janet, I see it all the time.
Look back at Solomon's life.
We see it all the way through the Old Testament, but I see it today. I see it today.
We haven't changed, as I said.
Well, the thing, I think a challenging thing for us is to make sure we have changed. To make sure that we aren't the same people with God that we were without God. You know? And I think that's a real challenge. I think in some, I'm not saying all these things we see ourselves, but I see human nature and I see people. We like to lord it over people. Nobody in this room. But, you know, that's human nature.
Everybody, in that case, everybody must get down here.
Well, let's go ahead and keep rolling here a little bit. Boy, our screen's quiet tonight. Wait a minute. Tom, did you have your hand up a minute ago? You sure?
Yes.
You decided you didn't want to say it. Okay.
I'm ready to move on with you.
All right. All right. Let's go to verse 12, down through 22. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. Oh no, right? See if I'm thinking that. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. And he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. And that's about a 40-mile journey. Wow. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? Well, they moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. Now that is 13 miles further north from Shechem. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Here's Larry's crazy brothers. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dream. Now, there were cisterns all the way throughout the land because typically there's about a 4-month period in Israel that is the rainy season. And so the cisterns were built to try to save some of that water through the year as they took their flocks and their herds. As you'll find out, though, this particular one was dry. Well, 21, this is interesting. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So, Joseph is about 55 miles away from home. He's checking on his brothers. His brothers see him coming. They're plotting. Let's take this guy out. Let's just be done with this. Let's see what becomes of his dream now. Do you find it interesting, Reuben stepping in? I mean, Reuben, he's the one who, I think the previous chapter, tried to establish himself kind of early in the process as the oldest by sleeping with Bilhah, the concubine of his father. Now Reuben is the one who's intervening. He's interceding on behalf of Joseph. And we're told, point blank, he said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Safe. Unharmed. That's his desire. Any thought? Question about that?
Well, he'd know if he took him, if he brought Joseph back, that would make him a more favorable son or whatever.
So maybe the motivation isn't necessarily top of the line.
No, I don't think
Could-
the motivation was
Could be still that idea
some gratification.
of wanting to make his dad. Mhm.
Could he have recognized his sin and, I mean, his concubine?
I think that's the other possibility. I mean, he could still be the same old Reuben, or he might have recognized because his father did come down on him pretty hard about that.
And he's the oldest?
Yes, he is the firstborn.
So
Okay?
you feel sort of a different responsibility as the firstborn? I mean, at least,
Well, that might be another piece to this. I mean, if Reuben lets this happen, then what's going to happen to his position as the firstborn? I mean, we just aren't told.
We're giving him too much credit.
We're giving him too much
and
credit.
he's
Just trying to find a clean way to just do away with him or whatever.
do both.
Well, now,
do
but it
both
does say at the end of verse 22, he said this to rescue Joseph from them and take him back to his father.
Yeah, he's going to stay in good graces with Dad.
He's going to stay in good graces with Dad. Well, I'm getting interesting responses here. Let's go ahead. Verse 23. Let's just keep going down to verse 30. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe, the robe of many colors he was wearing. They took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Now, isn't it kind of interesting that it's a band of Ishmaelites? When you go back it's about 180 years. You go back and you're with Abraham and Sarah saying, Abraham, since we don't have any kids, go with Hagar, and Ishmael's born. And lo and behold, here come the Ishmaelites 180 years later, coming from across the Jordan. So here comes Judah now. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants, a different term used there, when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern, sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Now holding it just for a second. If these were Midianites and Ishmaelites that were working together in a caravan, or if one was working for the other, we really aren't told clearly. But if you remember, the Midianites, Midian came from Abraham's wife, Keturah. And if you go back to Genesis 25, verse 2, toward the end of his life, he took all of it. Took another wife and had 6 children. I believe y'all can check that out. That's Genesis 25. Okay. So, but that's where the Midianites came from. So they paid 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern, he apparently wasn't there. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? He is really upset. Now, I realize every one of us here is trying to figure out why he's upset. What's the motivation behind it? We aren't told the motivation, but he is really upset about the fact. Now, where was he when this took place? Was he all eating by himself? Was he out getting firewood? I don't know.
He didn't know
Where
what he was
was
gonna
it?
tell his dad.
Huh?
He didn't know what he was
Well,
gonna tell
no,
his
he
dad.
didn't have a clue what he was going to tell his dad.
Yeah, and he didn't see this.
Was he upset about Joseph? Was he upset about what his father was going to say to him? As the old Eric's thinking, yeah, that's what it was. He's got to go tell Dad.
He's the oldest.
No, I mean, it's... And then we're introduced to Judah's part in this. And it's big of him. He says, let's just sell him because, you know, he is our flesh and blood. We don't want to put him to death. We don't want to kill him, really. I mean, maybe we want to, but we're not going to. All right. Let's go ahead and go through the end of the chapter and then whatever you want to bring up at that point. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. We are not told who instigated that. We're just told they all kind of did it together. They took the ornamented robe back to their father. Now picture this. And said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. The others, they didn't say, this is our brother's robe. This is your son's robe. And poor Jacob, Israel, he recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. They didn't even have to make up a story. They just gave him the robe. And Israel, Jacob, filled in the story. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. And then we're told, meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Okay. We know the rest of the story. They sold Joseph. We see Reuben's response. They come up with a plan to slaughter a goat and dip the ornamented robe into the blood, take it to their dad. Is this your son's robe? And of course Israel recognizes it. It was one of a kind. And he just goes into deep, immediate grief. And he can't be consoled. Any reaction?
I just thought that one thing that they didn't know Joseph was coming to where they were.
No, they just saw him. They just saw him coming from a distance. That's all.
They didn't know it until
Right.
they saw him. But I mean, what I'm saying is they made, you know, Israel might have thought, well, he never got to him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what they're certainly wanting him to think.
Yeah.
You know, that before he ever got there, they happened to find him out. Found the robe. Didn't find. That's what they want Israel to think. Mm-hmm.
Would that be usual to send somebody by? It sounds like he was by himself and he's walking 40 miles. I mean, would you send your child out like that?
I don't think that was unusual. I mean, these folks were shepherds.
I'm worried
They
about
were.
Max walking to the bus stop
I
next
mean,
year.
keep helicopter grandmother, right?
I
Okay.
try not to be,
Keep
but-
in mind, Jacob had gone 550 miles by himself. It's not out of it's just part of.
Good job. I mean, no
Part of the
wonder
life
they
of-
have to live longer if you spend that much of your time just walking. I mean,
Gonna be in good shape. Will be healthy. What other thoughts or questions? Larry?
You know, I take your point about that we see and we do stupid things ourselves. We do things that are jaw-dropping, shocking. But these guys take this blood-soaked coat to their father.
Yeah. It's horrible.
I mean, how could you hurt him anymore?
Yeah.
How callous is that? I mean, it's just
Totally agree.
overwhelming to me.
Yeah. Totally agree.
They said Joseph.
And I'm not trying to, I'm just saying, I watch some of the decisions that people make with no thought whatsoever of how it impacts their kids, their family, and just destroys them. Yeah. And they're in church.
Right.
And it just, yeah, you wonder how anybody can do that. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I wonder, I think that Jacob probably had a big time telling about his dreams and expected everybody to think he was something, and he was feeling pretty good about that. And I think Joseph felt the same way when he was telling his dreams. Look what God's doing in my life, or something similar. And then I think Jacob had this notion that somehow he was a favorite too, that God loved him, or he wouldn't have given him all this, you know.
Jacob felt that about Joseph, that God's hand was on Joseph.
Jacob felt like this was that God loved him, Jacob.
Okay.
And that
God
he was
did.
special.
I mean,
And I think when Joseph turned up dead, he's like, oh my gosh, I thought all my posterity was going to be something big, and now it's all going to, and so he just lays down, I think, and probably never wants to get up again.
Well, that would have been a big piece of what he was feeling. All's lost. It's all gone.
but Tom, wouldn't you want people like us, etc., who have sinned to recognize? I mean, because part of that, I thought I heard you say, was that he thought God loved him, favored him.
Yeah.
I think there are times when if God's that close to you, you might just keep it to yourself and just say, you know, this is too good. I'm not. It'll ruin it if I start blabbing around about this. You know.
I think when there's a spirit of humility, yes.
Okay.
When there's a spirit of humility, we tend to. I think of Mary taking in everything that she saw and heard with Simeon and Anna. She didn't go yapping to everybody about what Simeon and Anna said about the baby Jesus. We're told, she stored it up and she pondered it, meditated upon it, just trying to sort through, because she'd already been told by the angel Gabriel, you know, this child is going to be special, and she didn't, you know, she is a wonderful picture of humility all the way along throughout.
That's probably why she got picked.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't gonna pick some young girl that would have run around town and telling everybody.
Although he picked Jacob.
He had his reasons.
Well, you know, yeah. No, I get your point. I really do. That was big. That was a big deal, wasn't it? When it came to giving who's going to give birth to Jesus? Absolutely. God, the voice of God said through the prophet Isaiah, "My thoughts are not your thoughts." Right. All right. Any other? I know we marvel at all this, but is there anything that we can take from it, aside from marveling at the story itself? Is there anything that
should improve your parenting skills?
it ought to, shouldn't it?
It should.
Yeah. Brandon is soaking it in. He's about to be a dad
There
again.
you go.
Yeah, it's going to happen real soon.
He's going to be the favorite child.
I'll be telling my son to keep his dreams to himself.
Yeah. That's it. Ben, God tells you something, buddy. Don't go rubbing it in everybody's face, right? Yes, sir.
I was trying to remember, it's kind of hard to, how many wives did Jacob have?
Well, he had 2 wives and 2 concubines.
Because he's actually got 4 families going here. And that, I think that's what these, I know.
Well,
We all look
that's
at it
part
like
of
it's
the,
one
right,
family.
it's part of the struggle with these guys.
And
Yes.
they're not really one family. We've got 4 families here.
And we have that challenge today,
Yeah.
which it's blending families is a very real challenge today, and it's one of the things that church probably needs to try to do better. Not this church, but the church, this included, this church needs to try to do better to help families that are blended, because obviously there's not a natural draw between siblings coming from 2 different situations. So, and here you got 4. So,
I mean, they may all have
And-
the same father, but
right.
When did,
it's obvious the brothers hated each other.
Well, and it's clear to the sons who the dad favors. He favors the sons of Rachel.
Would they have all had separate tents, the wives would have their tents with their,
I'm assuming they're not all under the same tent.
right?
And these guys are, many of them are much older and
Yeah.
have their own families. And Janet, you were going to say something.
Before the 10 Commandments, at what point does the Lord say, hey, this is not working? We need to just have one family, one set of children, and...
You mean, where's the model come from?
Yeah, at what point?
I think the model comes from Genesis 1, right off the bat. A man will leave his father and mother and unite to his wife, and 2 will become one.
Yes, but
That's,
the way things are going here, they unite
well,
one wife and
they're
concubines and everything
They
like
weren't
that.
following.
they're totally ignoring it. They're embracing the ways of the culture.
I see.
And what's happening? Utter chaos. Okay? And that's one of this, that's a major problem we have right now. We're embracing the ways of the culture around us in so many moral venues and ways. And that creates problems because it's stepping outside of God's bounds, and that creates a lot of issue. Mm-hmm.
I had myself and my sister, full sisters. I had 2 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters. I had a stepbrother from my stepmother, and I had a stepbrother from my stepfather. So there's 4 families. And I was raised in it. I'm the child inside that.
So you
Now, who did I?
can connect.
I
with
can
this story.
relate to it, but you know, my closest, the one I call
And
my
you're not the only one in this room that's going through that. I mean, there's other people that come from.
And my
blended
half-sister
families.
Debbie and I are the only 2 that really bonded of those 4. I mean, other than my sister and I, and she's my sister mother and I'm her sister mother.
Huh.
But my half-sister Debbie and I have a relationship. I mean, we
Right.
care that.
Right.
But out of those other 4, out of those families, there's 2, myself and my half-sister.
We aren't told here who's close to who. We just
No,
aren't
we
given
aren't.
that
We aren't.
information.
No.
And all we know is that Israel, Jacob, favored the sons of Rachel, the woman he loved.
Right, there's a lot we don't know.
Okay, what we're going to do next week is do an overview of chapter 38. So I want you to read it so you're fully aware of it. There's certainly an interesting outcome to this story that gives us insight into the whole concept of Judah and his tribe. With the birth of Perez and Zillah. So check that out. And then we're going to move on into Joseph in Potiphar's household. Okay? Quiet.
I don't think it's working.
All right. Let's stand together and we'll have closing prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. It sure doesn't try to cover up anything. It lays it out there. And I pray as we continue to read and study that we learn, that you encourage us. Father, I think about a funeral I had not too long ago. And it was very sad. Because in essence, relatives were saying, I learned from the one who died how not to live. And Father, maybe that's a lesson for us in all of this. Very clear reminders how not to live. But Lord, I pray you go with us and keep our eyes fixed upon you. Keep our heart tuned into your word and your spirit. Praying continually that others see your Son Jesus in us. And we pray this in his precious name. Amen.